Gray mist clings to the thing field, seal hides are tacky with dew, sheep and goats nose the rope to see if today it is food. The driftwood scorn pole leans like a drunk's advice, horse head lashed at its tip, mane molting. You're the newest law warden's helper on word watch, stake bag on your hip, a coil of scald cord in your fist, a pot of red ochre that will make friends or enemies depending on your wrist. If you like watching a laugh turn into quiet law without anyone needing to swing steel, walk with me. Tap subscribe and ring the bell. We'll set a line that keeps pride from cheating and courage from turning into chaos. Orders are plain because consequences aren't. Peg a speaking cord for the scalds. Square the scorn pole facing the wind. Check the verse tally. Post the no blood on joke night board where fists will trip on it before they remember their owners. A farm lad at the rear mutters for courage. Goats aren't brave. The law speaker, wrapped in seal and patience, points his staff at the chief who flinched last raid when a billy charged the grindstone. Make it matter, he says. You kneel and draw the first chalk line across the turf. Peg taps, tap tap, turn, tap. The scald cord runs round the speaking ground in a shallow circle that looks like courtesy and acts like offense. Cord too near and pride cheats. Men shout from breath that should be for wit. Cord too far and courage turns to chaos. The ring becomes a rumor and nobody owes measure. Either way, the line must be up before the horn peals speak. You pull the slack smart, set the first peg at ankle depth, not calf. You're building seams, not walls. Pull, the housecarl grunts, ramming a stake with his palm. You go to the nidstong and plummet, heel to base, eye to horsehead. Wind wants the horse to stare seaward, tongue into the weather. You stamp the footing, scatter a braid of horsehair from the spare sack so the head won't look bald of contempt, and take the ochre to the carved eyes until they remember they are supposed to see. You ring the pole's base with chalk, because measure like circles and tempers don't. A goat blats at a blue cloak and startles a cousin into a pose he will deny later. You draw a safe laugh seam on the turf in a crescent inside the scald cord, 2 fingers of distance where a man can grin without looking like a wolf. Chalk rings bloom like low moons. Your tally board gets its first morning scratches, oaths sworn, 0, fines paid, 0, verse count. Aim for 40 before noon so people remember breath belongs to jokes before it belongs to threats. Hidden worlds wait under your bracers. Last winter's nid list with barred insults. No naming mothers with death still fresh. No slurs that call luck a disease. No goat jokes that pretend goats are people you can kill. You tuck it under the plank but keep a thumb on it. The hand signs travel with the cord, 2 fingers down, step, flat palm, hold, fist low, down. Pocket drill in your head, set feet, breathe, speak. You'll be teaching that to a mouth before the horn remembers it's an instrument. The law speaker approaches. His linen bracer shows a lifetime of rope scars. He lifts his staff and the horn answers with its hush note. You feel his gaze drop to your cord hand and stay. You nudge the circle 1 boot wider on the west where a bog remembers its rights. He sees the tiny move. He says nothing. That is permission here. Bored, he says. You tramp to the sign and paint no blood on joke night in ochre that looks like a warning and is. Below it you write in smaller hand. Measure kept equal to staff rap. Measure lost equal to sack fine. Third rap equal to sit down. Staff rapping for measure kept is the oldest sound on this field besides goats. The horn peals speak. Before it, 1 last check. You sight along the cord. The scald circle reads as circle. You sight the scorn pole. The horse head faces weather. You stamp the footing along the inside ring because a clean laugh lives in confident ankles. Chalk rings at the pole and at the circle seam agree with each other. Good. The first scald steps in. Linen bracer up. Wrist remembering waxed string and harp somewhere else. He breathes, breaks, and the goat arrives in his mouth. Some men fear blades, he sings, eyes on the chief who flinched last raid. Some men fear waves. Our chief fears Billy's horns and hooves and beard. The fiddle at the back squeaks from holding laughter too long. The housecarl's palm finds his peg again without knowing why. The goat at the rope noses the cord like a conspirator. You log verse count 1, fine 0. A hand near the outside rises. 2 fingers from you, step. Don't shout across your neighbor's ear. Flat palm, hold until the rhyme lands. The skald breathes, breaks. The laugh lands. The chief's mouth remembers how to be a mouth and not a blade. Staff wrap. Measure kept. Suspense peeks over the cord. You set the ring near enough to bite or far enough to bleed. Threads of pride spider the turf. You pull a peg a thumb outward on the east, where the wild onions wake in the dew. No one needs to slip into another man's temper today. The lad with the mutter squints, sees nothing, and therefore sees the work. A housecarl tries to swagger into the seam, 2 fingers down. Step. He steps. The goat blats as if on cue. Someone at the back says, "Goats aren't brave," in a voice that wants to hire fear. You hear the law speaker tap his staff once, patient thunder. You move without turning it into drama. Set feet, breathe, speak. You tell the boy's mouth when it tries to outrun its owner. He obeys the drill. The field sighs into agreement. Facts become sounds. Peg taps in the mist. Red ochre drying on wood. The horn's hush note shaped like an old man's hand. A scald's linen bracer creaking as he gestures. Chalk rings white against wet turf. Staff rapping when a verse kept pace. Words that wanted to be knives learning to be jokes instead. You log oaths and fines as they happen. Oath. Haakon's son of Kettle forbears to strike at talk, 2 witnesses. Fine. Sack of barley from Orm's tent for stepping the cord thrice. Staff raps. 2. Verse count climbs. You whisper it to the law speaker between quips, because numbers do work on this field too. The scorn pole's horse head needs its mane fluffed. You give it horsehair from the spare sack because theater is part of law. You chalk a small ring at the base and instruct a boy with hand signs to aim jokes at the circle, not at throats. He grins like a person who just learned where to put his boots. Somewhere, a goat noses a cloak until a noble's balance considers leaving. The farm lad at the rope flinches. Down, you sign, and he crouches instead of lunging. Step, you tell the noble with 2 fingers, and his boots find 1 more inch of competence. You nail your chalk to the work. Safe laugh seam here, here, and you make it matter by believing the line first. The law speaker's eye keeps finding your cord hand. He wants the ring near enough to be brave and far enough to be kind. You keep borrowing inches from anxiety and returning them to sense. A chalk line is quieter than a threat and sticks longer. If it were your field, if a chief had flinched at a goat last raid, how close would you set the speaking cord, at first light, nearer for bite or wider for safety? Put your vote and where you're watching from below. I read them when the ochre dries on my knuckles and the staff decides whether to rap again. You pace the circle once more. Pegs sit like tame teeth. The cord hums with attention, not anger. The scorn pole faces wind and tells the truth without spitting. The goat blats 1 last opinion and the crowd laughs in the right direction. The horn will say, "Speak again in a breath." You'll be ready. Measure kept is the sound of pegs, chalk, breath, and a joke that knows where to land. You set feet. You breathe. You let somebody else speak. Dew settles on the thing field and forgets to leave. The cord is cold in your palm. Pegs knock a little tune your wrist knows by heart. Routine is the law that teaches courage to stay civil. Before sun, peg the circle. Tap, tap, turn, tap. Run the cord true. No swales for pride to hide in. No proud humps to make a quip cheat. Paint the pole eyes. Red ochre warmed in your fist. A thumb of horsehair teased from the sack to give the carved horse its contempt back. Stamp the footing along the seam so the first laugh lands on confidence, not luck. At the horn, quip, answer, hush. At the laugh read, post tally, move back a pace, the ring widens as wit wakes. At lull, swap frayed harp strings for waxed, Saturday slack died last winter. Dry cord first is the law that keeps noise from pretending to be measure. You sling a length of laundry rope between uprights to air spare cloaks so shoulders don't blame the wind for their temper. You draft the rota small in chalk along the plank. Pole menders forward at first lull, hands that know how to square a face without picking a fight. Hush staffs to lanes, 1 per seam to wrap measure kept and make silence cheaper than rage. Reserves to the rear ring to widen on order. They will pretend boredom now and be grateful when boredom turns into making space for someone braver. Your job sits on your knuckles. Set the speaking sequence. Tie-colored tags on staves where a glance will tell a mouth what hour it is. White for wit, clean jokes, quick measure. Blue for oath verse, words that bind with witnesses watching. Yellow for wind test, goat jokes, keep them light, don't make them mothers. Your ledger opens and learns 4 verbs again. Pegged, dressed, loosed, set by. The law speaker's stylus whispers them into his wax as if numbers are talismans. Peg taps, straw crackle by the pole. Wax blocks thudding for harp strings. The horn peals for mark, hush before speech, the note that gives laughter a spine. The day pretends it is learned. It isn't. The provost arrives with a small book that would like to be a conscience and boots that would prefer gravel to grass. Inspection, he says, rehearsed, eye on the cord as if his word makes lines straight. Let him step over and you'll stir gossip. They're cooking the jokes. Bar him and he leaves with the same sentence said bitter. Either way, the first quip will not wait. You scrape a peg tip across the turf, threshold only, and hand him your verse board instead. Posted, dressed, read. He leans, finds dew and chalk and no theater, and becomes scenery without being told twice. The line hums. A housecarl in the near ring glances at his white tag, lifts his staff just enough to mean ready, and the whistle chirps for the first exchange. Quip, answer. Hush, staff rap. The pole listens with its ochre eyes, wind plucking its horsehair mane into the right kind of prophecy. Then the day trips over its own ink. An ink pot tips across your verse book because a cold thumb thought it was a palm. You slide your wrist under the spill and rescue the column that counts, verses loosed, fines set by, oaths pegged. 3 entries drown. Your head writes them back, while your hand blots and your mouth keeps moving the next 2 speakers with finger signs. Step, hold, down. So the laugh lands where the chord means. 2 clans swap places without asking, habit outrunning instruction. You redress the ring in shadow as a lantern crawls closer, a sleeve tug, a palm down, a soft down for the one whose courage has mistaken volume for measure. The chord stays true. The morning keeps pretending it planned this. A friar palms you a chit from the alderman. Wax confusing polish for law. Opened by order, the face claims. Closer peg for a certain tent, the whisper means. You file it in the drawer that kills paper gently and tie a yellow tag on a weed near his memory. As a private joke your conscience approves. Horn for mark. Drums muffled for the laugh red. You walk the circle with chalk and count for the law speaker who prefers numbers to stories. Don't tug a rhyme to prove a point, you tell a puller, count, don't argue. White tags go home mostly honest. Blue makes 3 oaths worth witnesses. Yellow tests the wind with a goat and remembers not to make a woman of it. Wax blocks thud down the lane. Palms warm harp strings. Dry chord first, you hear in 3 places you weren't standing. A good rule travels by itself. Corruption keeps its regular appointments. A porter sidles behind a bale and offers extra heads, goat skulls, to a chief who doesn't need more theater than the pole already has. Your look performs arithmetic he can't. He learns subtraction. A cousin waves a folded open by order for a closer peg. The seal smells like pocket. You flatten it with your palm until it remembers paper is not a voice. The second, secret slate in your coat. 3 chiefs who never stand the near ring, burns like a small coal. You erase one name because last night he traded pegs with a novice and never bragged. The other 2 you carry into tomorrow like a thorn you intend to pluck when you've earned the grip. Quip. Answer. Hush. Staff rap for measure kept. The goat near the rope blats at precisely the wrong time, and the ring laughs in the right direction. The lad from yesterday who muttered goats aren't brave lifts a yellow tag and learns to swallow his own speed, set feet, breathe, speak. His joke lands where the chalk ring said it would. The chief he meant to sting grins before his hand remembers it used to be a fist. The provost circles again, looking for an audience. You draw your peg line in the turf a second time because sometimes theater is a courtesy. He stops at threshold, reads the white-blue-yellow rhythm, sees his own lack of work, and vanishes. The horn peals for read again. You post tally, then move the chord back a pace. Laugh read buys breathing room. Pegs answer your mallet. The chord hums like a well-tuned string. Verses loosed 17. Fine set by 1 orm, step the cord a third time. Oaths pegged 2. Your ledger closes with its 4 verbs and no excuses. Pegged, dressed, loosed, set by. If a provost wanted inside the cord to quiet rumor, would you let him inside inspection or keep him threshold only? Put your vote in where you're watching from below. I read them when the ochre dries on my knuckles and the cord asks to be pegged true again. You coil slack, set pegs, paint eyes. The ring knows the shape of its courage. The goats have lost interest in being prophets. The law speaker's staff raps twice for measure kept and not once for blood. You take the hint, you breathe, you let someone else speak. The morning learns it was never about louder. It was about cord, chalk, breath, and a joke that knew where to land. Frost kisses the bale faces, thaw wakes underneath, ink goes sulky in the well and pretends it won't be needed if it just sits there. You roll the wax between thumb and forefinger for a stiff harp string, nick the clogged quill for the tally, and put your heel into yesterday's seam. It lies politely, top firm, under soft. The field intends to be treacherous and sensible at once. By the fence, a market man rents his throat to a rumor he thinks is coin. They put captains on close marks and fathers at far. He tries it 3 ways to see which sells best. The warden does not argue. He rests his palm on the cordon bar, warden's peace at the cordon. Then to you, short orders that make your wrists honest. Demonstration without spectacle. Move the cord in the open. Mend the scorn pole first for the novice lane. Chalk fresh on the board, firm here, danger there. From the church steps the sacrist adds the tax your shoulders have already paid. No clatter, mass. Your morning becomes a shuttle of small courtesies. Front cord, pole cart, far wing, back and forth until the ground decides it is being watched. You cradle spare bales under canvas so they don't look like theater. You peg where the frost stayed loyal. Dress where the thaw began to lie. Stamp the seam yourself so the first boot won't be surprised. You pull the scald cord out in a shallow arc and pin it straight in public, because geometry calms men more than speeches do. Then the choice that buys you critics no matter what. Post the chord shift first, clean, visible, arithmetic, and the townsmen cry favoritism. See, captains get firm, fathers get far. Post the rotation list first, needier, fair, and the captain fumes. You're teaching people their place matters more than their form. Meanwhile, if a passerby spies the goat skulls under canvas, he'll shout curse instead of rule. So you pick your order. Path first, promise second. Cord in the open, rotation immediately after. Goat heads where law wardens can see they belong to pole dressing, not to magic. The captain's clerk arrives with a rota torn down the spine by a thumb that wanted to be a palm. Paste, thread, the little iron he keeps under his cuff like a sin. You hold a corner and let him triage. No clatter. The sacrist reminds the iron when it thinks about performing. The clerk grins, stitches quieter. A herald's trumpet slices rising talk into bits too small to hire. The cellarer hisses move at a knot of shoulders that thought they were a conversation. A boy sags at full jest, breath getting ahead of courage. You steady his elbow with your sleeve and tap his shoulder twice. Set feet, breathe, speak, you tell his mouth, pocket drill, and the joke lands where the chalk rings said it would. The pole listens with ochre eyes and keeps its contempt to itself. You chalk the public board near the bar, firm here, danger there, in a hand that refuses drama. Under it 2 columns the council adopted like a coat, butts dressed, bales mended, strays arrested, verses over the line. Ticks, 2 underdressed, novice lane first, D3 refaced, 1 under strays, outer ring quip clipped before it turned into a fight. To the side you write the hour, and the reassurance markets by, sureties for good behavior at mid-bell, warden's peace at the cordon meanwhile. You move the cord where everyone can see it and forget to shout. Peg taps, cord hums. The novice butt gets its center stuffed first. You pat straw into truth and square the frame with a string and a pebble. You write the rotation list while the cord still sings. Near ring names, far ring names, dry cord first. If someone squints for his entitlement, the list stares back until he learns to read. A friar palms you a chit from the alderman, wax confusing polish for command. Opened by order, the face claims. Closer peg for a certain tent, the whisper means. You slide it under the tally and let paper learn patience until it dies of it. Meanwhile, the goat skulls sit openly on the pole cart with a chalk mark that says, pole dress only. A passerby opens his mouth for curse. Rule, you tell the space he intended, and arithmetic supports you. A priest spots chalk sigils blooming on 2 risers and says, no charms on kit, device not charm, you note in your book and wipe the marks away with vinegar. The apothecary walks the fence selling a sentence, peas and felt save bowels, wax saves wrists, wax does. You put a rosemary sprig by the water tub to keep hands sweet and leave magic to men who can afford it. By the time the council bell lifts a hush even the market man respects, your proof looks like furniture. Cord shifted in the open. Novice lane dressed first. Rotation posted without a cousin in it. Butts that tell the truth about where center actually is. You read the board aloud for the edge of the crowd that pretends letters are for other men. Firm here, danger there. Butts dressed, 2. Strays arrested, 1. Sureties at mid-bell. The trumpet answers with unexpected cooperation. If it were your hour, if the warden ordered demonstration without spectacle, what would you post first, cord first or rotation first? Put it, and where you're watching from below. I read them when the ink stops sulking and the cord asks to be pegged again. You finish your sprint, front cord, pole cart, far wing, and the captain sees the sequence, sees the board, sees your goat skulls sitting in daylight and not in somebody's pocket, and doesn't fume. That's permission enough. The boy at full jest finds his breath again. The myth at the fence runs out of buyers. The sacrist takes his palm off the church door. The line quips without clatter. You leave the proof where it belongs, quiet and obvious. The field decides to behave. Torches gutter and make the yard look meaner than it was at noon. Gates bar with that elbow-deep clunk that ends the day whether anyone agrees. Word, which keeps its own hours, slips past the rope and hires a chorus. Blind marks. Favored Fletch. The square likes a rhyme when it thinks it was cheated of a nearer peg. Inside, the hall meets by candle to do what halls are for. Turn mockery into policy. The beetle taps your plank twice with the stick that believes it writes law. Copy fair, copy fast, flawless. You square the sheet. The quill behaves because your hand has learned not to consult your feelings. Public notice. Quiet passage to and from the cord. You write it where boots will be forced to read before throats can improvise. Fines. Written as alms because the cellarer likes the sound. For broken pegs and barred insults. Novice lane dressed first. On paper, orders to post the day's range and wind at dawn so rumor wakes up unemployed. You leave small doors the town needs to breathe. Save collapse, save fever, save order under strain. Sand hisses. The line goes matte. Before it dries, a flare in the shed blooms. Orange climbs faster than sense. You and 2 boys are already moving. Buckets find your hands as if they were always meant to. Wet wool hisses on embered planks. The line at the gate forgets its lyrics long enough to watch flame learn manners. Rosemary and vinegar return to their quieter work of smelling like discipline. Back at the plank, the beetle plants a knuckle in your margin. A small slip slides under your thumb with the practiced innocence of a profitable sin. Keep this quiet, the neat hand says. You lay it under the ledger and rest your palm there until paper remembers that filing is a kind of death. Omit it forever, your bone tells your nerve. Your nerve sits. A coin rings on your plank and refuses to shine. The dead carrier's sister stands with shoulders like broom handles and a voice built to carry 5 words. Save the sick from far marks. Not loud, truer than the jeer outside. You point your pen at the clause that teaches exceptions not to breed and write what the range needed to learn. Sick and novice on close pegs in foul wind, far only on clear. The beetle coughs at the line that will cost him a friend. You keep the curve of the S steady as if dignity could be written into vowels. Under the guest loft, a trap yawns. Men step down with private purses and come up with lighter pockets and better stories, extra pegs, extra strings. A porter has discovered he likes counting with his palm. You lift the hatch with a peg just enough to count and close it on a promise your shoulder can pay for in the morning. 2 more pegs gone than posted. 2 fewer strings returned than sworn. The seller's hand lands on your shoulder and weighs like a nail. "Make it wood," his thumb says. You nod. Boards can learn policy. You carry the fresh notice to the bar. Key rings stacked like teeth on the bailiff's belt chatter when the cartwheel squeals its old grievance. Someone shames it with grease and the purr returns. You nail the paper where hands can't pretend they weren't told. A drum under the board gives the words a little spine. Suspense sits behind your shoulder like a cat. If the jeers aren't answered, the outer bar will try to be a song. If you answer wrong, your name slides onto the stone the clerk keeps oiled, to be silenced. Either way, the morning horn won't wait, and the company needs a dawn more than your pride. Inside, tallies of peg amercements line up under your pencil. Recognizances with awkward crosses shiver into the docket, some firm, some sideways, some made by hands that prefer tools to pens. Rosemary and vinegar steam lift the room's patience a half-inch. The astrologer drifts in, declares the hour lucky if men stop talking, then pushes the lucky hour forward with his thumb when clouds thicken, nobody pays him, and he pretends the sky did. A patron's runner offers a folded chit with wax that confuses polish for law. Open by order, it claims, chin high at your margin. You lay it under the same palm that smothered the beetle's slip, and let paper learn to die politely. Now the contested name. It warms your pocket like a small stove. A chief whose cousin stands too often under the arch with the steward expects the close peg rotation like it were inheritance. He doesn't belong there. Another name does, the convalescent who stitched a butt in sleet without being told, the skald whose oath verse kept a fist from happening. Erase or obey. Unlock or relock. You lay the bad name on the plank over the rosemary tack and let friction pretend to be fate. You set him aside. You write the other in a hand the field has learned to trust and punish. Your handwriting is where mercy lives. The company will teach you later what it costs to be recognized by your letters. The beetle's cough finally locates the line that will make him defend you to men who look like his friends. The warden signs with the letter that doesn't blush. The captain scans the page, prefers arithmetic to adjectives, and nods toward the board. A friar palms you a chit from the alderman. You let him watch you file it in the drawer where paper goes to learn that patience is fatal. You return to the trap under the loft and ask the dark for arithmetic. Extra pegs? Extra strings? The porter's smile loses a tooth. You count again. 2 more gone than posted. 2 fewer returned than sworn. The seller's thumb presses your shoulder like a promise with hardware. Make it wood. You nod. Morning will learn carpentry. The outer bar leans again, and a herald's trumpet cuts the sound into compliant pieces. You read the notice aloud, because policy grows up when it hears itself. Quiet passage. Fines for broken pegs and barred insults. Novice Lane dressed first. Range and wind at dawn. The market man tests favored Fletch one last time and watches the board ignore him like old wood ignores adjectives. If it were your plank, if a sister's coin rang dull where your sand still dried, if a patron's slip asked your margin to forget itself, if a name in your pocket insisted on warmth it hadn't earned, what would you write? Omit or obey? Put it and where you're watching from below. I read them when the ochre flakes from my fingers, and the cord asks whether it belongs on the turf again. You knot the notice where the drum can keep it company. You file the coin in the dish that will be the only place tonight where money does what it's told. You file the chits in the drawer that kills them softly. You leave the contested name where Rosemary can keep it from sticking to your hand again. You bank the brazier, torches gutter, gates bar. The hall smells like ink that decided to be honest and smoke that learned restraint. Outside, a company is learning quiet rules by cord and chalk instead of threat. That is the price of laughter on paper, and the road will keep the bargain. Dawn unlatches the yard. Trumpets wet their lips. Drums find yesterday's beat and lend it to a square that hasn't earned music yet. The velvet voice climbs its crate by the bar and pins the morning to the cord. His Grace commends those who kept quiet order on the cord. Ranges are chalked because a bargain in ink said they would be. Windows stand open not from virtue, but from a rule that knew how to write itself into air. The brazier glows the way a good tool glows, only because the order allowed it, not because anyone needs to admire it. The market man with the myth strolls past the fence free as air, trying out a new sentence on the morning and deciding to save it for a paying crowd. A midwife's lintel wears a yellow tag instead of red. Someone wrote the exception, and someone else obeyed it. Near the cooper's stall, a widow folds to the cobbles. Two strangers make a chair of their hands and lift her, as if the city had rehearsed it, which it has. The velvet voice finishes the page. People accept being commended because it costs them nothing right now. Your errands have edges. You are final witness and courier of consequences. First duplicate to the warden, quiet passage to and from the cord, fines, called alms to keep peace with ears for broken pegs and barred insults, novice lane dressed first, day's range and wind to be posted at dawn, daily until memory behaves. He signs with the letter that doesn't blush and gives you the small look you've been earning all week. I saw, second to the captain, the dry rhoda, the seam stitched by the clerk's little iron, the tally, butts dressed, strays arrested, arithmetic she prefers to adjectives. She nods once and spares you both a speech. Third to the guild, hung where money pretends to learn manners, a snowfall of paper that settles dust without cleaning blood. Over yesterday's shut-ups for false oath, a muster sheet for the king's levy is pinned, wide as appetite. Names start to bud at the lower edge where pride and debt keep their appointment. You finally understand what daily butts bought. Not glamour, but obedience. Not luxury, but lanes that move, bellies steady, lines that hold, and a harvest of men promised for later, because a straight cord is useful to more than archers. The dry rhoda hangs over the board, close peg, far peg, dry cord first, with the calm you wished for last week. Vinegar coins clink in ladles at the chest, chests of fines groan into carts and perform their little purr after somebody shames the wheels with grease. A parchment-marked misadventure for a slip at wet flags goes into the docket, a lie with a warm heart that keeps the morning cheaper. The last rosemary bundle smolders to ash on the brick. The priest who warned off charms chalked on risers watches it die, and decides to respect devices publicly for a week. Then your coat reminds you it has a drawer, the secret slate of spared rotations, the three chiefs who didn't take their near-peg turn because you decided luck owed them interest. The side list of pegs you shifted against orders in the cold hour when thaw lied beneath frost, and sense outranked command. Leak, burn, or file. You hold both like hot bread. Leak would be honest and brief. You would be, too. It would splash in the square like a good sin, and die when nobody could afford to adopt it. Burn would be quick and teach you nothing but how to run colder. File is the story this corner survives by, proof where questions with hats can find it, nowhere near mouths with errands. You slide slate and list into the drawer under the ledger, and listen for the click that promises a better hour will be allowed to ask you why. File. The steward finds you the way enamel always does. He offers a badge to mark more wisely, as if clarity were a party trick you refuse to perform. The guildmaster occupies the shade near your shoulder and offers sanctuary till the pest passes, the kind of dangerous kindness that fits under a cloak. The warden passes and gives you what he does best in your direction. Not nothing, not much. I saw. You answer all three with what you own. Keys, cord, brazier, silence. Here, your wrists say. You keep your post. Public reading by the bar begins again because velvet likes threes. The drum slips a spine under the notice. The captain's clerk flits in to finger the knot on the rhoda, decides it will hold, and vanishes before the market man can hire his breath. The cellarer hisses move at a shadow out of habit. The sacrist rubs his palm along the church door and decides the wood can keep quiet without supervision. A runner from the alderman tries you with a new chit. Open by order, the wax whispers, humbler than yesterday's. You set it under your palm and let your hand decide. Omit. You chalk a dot on your wrist to remind yourself who deserves your braver voice later, the novice whose lane you dressed in sleet, and the convalescent whose cord you warmed against orders. Rules are supposed to keep people alive, not busy. A chief with a cousin under the arch asks to be moved up the close peg rotation by describing his children at heroic length. You point at the board without lifting your chin. He reads the ties, white, blue, yellow, learns his place, and will remember later that he was part of something he didn't own. If you had to choose, soft under a patron's livery or hard under sanctuary eaves, what keeps you whole, livery or sanctuary? Put it and where you're watching from below. I count them after the last wax flake leaves my fingers and the cord asks whether it belongs on the turf again. By noon, the extracts have turned into furniture. People lean on them and forget the time when paper had to prove itself. The levy clerk learns to keep his line moving without explaining his face. The market man tests a new myth and discovers grief has better ears than appetite. The board holds. The cord stays true. The line breathes without you needing to give it a mouth. Justice this week was airflow and cord budget. Mercy was policy, not indulgence. Survival was a choreography of chalk, pegs, and staves performed by people who don't need to be sung about to do it again. You were the hinge. You coil the slack. You pocket the keys. You bank the brazier. The horn will say mark, and the whistle will say hush, and the cord will mean speak. The road will keep its bargain if you keep yours.